I would say like these are the kind of undertakings that I think we're made for as people. Like you said, looking at to feed a machine or to give thanks to the earth and creation and life and spirit. These are the things we're made for. We're meant to be home for these ever enlarging understandings that just make us better at loving life and feeding life and caring for life so that we can be like Fool's Crow, this living example that transmits out to all the others who are involved in different stages of becoming living examples of the same.
Cliff Taylor, thanks a lot for joining me on the podcast. I appreciate you joining me.
Thank you for inviting me. Really appreciate the chance to be here.
I was trying to remember how I found out about you and your work. We've been friends, friends on Instagram for a little while, and I can't remember the initial thing that brought your work to my attention. But you sent me some of your books, and man, your writing is just so beautiful. It, I think it's like full of grief and praise and humility and joy. And I'm really just enjoying the stories that you're telling. And yeah, so I guess I want to talk to you without like any real agenda, but just talk about your work and a bit about your story and your people. I thought that would be nice.
Well, thank you. Just before I came on or was getting everything set up for this interview, I was with my partner and I have uh, I have 5 books out, and I think it was the first moment. Maybe I am a part of me is a true geek at heart, but I think it was the first moment my geek self grabbed all 5 of my books that have come out in the last 4 or 5 years and like held them up and regarded them and saw, wow, look, because it's been a lifelong dream of mine to be a Ponca who writes books for his people, and somehow I have accomplished that with the help of many, and it's just a beautiful place to be at in my life right now. I guess to share just some broad strokes on my background. I'm from Nebraska. Spent the first 34 years of my life there in Nebraska. Grew up in Columbus, Nebraska. It's always, I mean, now that I'm older, now that I'm an adult, now that I want to say like as a writer, poet, uh, spiritual man with a highly active imagination, who's, also a myth fighter, tangling with these, you know, bad myths, these ill myths, some might even say nefarious myths. I reflect on how I spent the first 18 years of my life uh, coming of age in a town that was named after the man who discovered America. So I think from the get-go, there was just a strange pall kind of looming over my youth. And I think it was almost purposefully there, so sometimes when we're young, we get acquainted with things that are going to play large roles in our lives as we get older. And I guess our gifts and talents and abilities, and I want to say like the major parts of our soul come online. So there I was in Columbus, Nebraska, small Midwestern town in the middle of nowhere. And, I was kind of, battling my way through, in a lot of ways, I want to say like a contemporary traditional, in the 80s and 90s, we would say Indian life. Nowadays we would say native or indigenous life. And it was just full of a lot of the unfortunate tragedies that a lot of people from a distance who aren't fully acquainted with uh, the real depth and breadth of Indian reality from a distance they see, and that's a lot of alcoholism, a lot of poverty, a lot of sadness, a lot of violence, A lot of my, my dad was in prison and stuff like that. So that's kind of the scene I was coming of age in. But my mom, she was a librarian. She worked at the Columbus Public Library for about 12 years when I was a kid. So I was getting that experience of what does it mean to be a native person today in the face of 500 years of colonization and genocide. But through my mom, through I want to say the spirit of the library and my mom's love of books, I was making rad, beautiful friends with all of these books, all these writers, all these authors that were, I guess I want to say, showing up for me and potentially being vehicles for other spirits and other ancestors who were showing up for me. So I just fell in love with reading, and reading in books became such a powerful comfort, therapy, I want to say like journeying mode for my soul and my imagination. And they became travel means for locating different kinds of knowledge and information that my being was yearning for so that it could contend with, the just the hard reality of being an Indian kid in Nebraska in the 80s. So kind of all of that wrapped up around the dreams that I brought with me into this world. I wanted to write books, and as I got older, it became more important to me to understand, well, who am I as an Indian? Because when you're young, everybody's asking you all this stuff. You have the innocent questions from your friends, the innocent questions from, your first girlfriends, and then you have a lot of almost questioning and interrogating from, different adults. You're a curiosity,
Hmm.
you're maybe a freak, you're an embarrassment from a time that the dominant culture is working very hard to forget. So you kind of are interrogated. And when you're young, at least me, I didn't have the answers to those questions. I didn't know who I was. Who does when they're 10, 12, a teenager, even in your early 20s? So as I got older, it became more important for me to understand those things. And maybe we can get into that as we go along. But the first thing I did is I wanted to go read some Ponca books.
Hmm.
And I discovered there were no books written by anybody in my tribe, the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska. And so it became a dream for me to see that empty bookshelf of books written by Poncas, to see that empty bookshelf become a bookshelf populated by all kinds of books written by Poncas, because we're living in this hybrid modern world, and books are awesome ways, they're awesome resources to, like I said, get information, get knowledge, and also get sparks to searching, hungry, hurt people or interested people. So all these years later, I have found myself with 5 books and the actualization of that dream. So now in the world, there are books written by Ponkas, and there's young Ponkas I've talked to in different talks and readings I've given, and they want to be mystery writers, or they want to be, this type of writer. And you demonstrate that it's possible for you. In Indian country, there's so much messaging from the outside world telling you that you're nothing, you're nobody, you're dirty, you have nothing to contribute, and you start to believe that stuff about yourself, and it
Hmm.
becomes like this controlling organism of untruth that's haunting your brain. But if you start to read some books written by natives, especially natives who are in your own tribe, it's like the antidote to remove that organism from your brain. And suddenly you have the organism of illuminated truth, rocking and rolling, playing your guitar, kicking ass, and living large in your humble human consciousness. So I guess that's a little bit about who I am. That's a little bit about where I come from. That's a little bit about what I'm about. And I enjoy talking about this stuff. So wherever this conversation goes, I'm happy and open to go there. So thank you, Brian.
Yeah. Nice. That's a great origin story, man, and one I can relate to on some level. Just feeling, obviously much different circumstances. My people are of European descent. I'm a European mutt, and my people came here just a few generations ago. So I don't have that same connection to place and land and genocide that was a part of your upbringing. But like also finding refuge in books, starting to read from a really young age. It was like in my DNA to be a reader and seeker, and finding a lot of, like you said, solace and friendship, companionship in these books. And I'm curious, like, what kind of books were there for you? Like at first, I don't know. I'm guessing that it was more kind of. I've heard you mention like reading Stephen King before, and he was a big one for me too. This book that he wrote with Peter Straub called The Talisman, which is like a magical journey that this young boy goes on, and he's got a werewolf companion. That book was so profoundly affecting to me as a kid. It was like a shamanic journey, and it was the first book that made me cry. And I remember just like weeping when I got to the end of the book and, calling to my mother for some consolation and just feeling like nobody could understand the amount of loss that I felt because I was really in that world. And so books for me were like you were kind of saying, is they're like a portal to another place, another person's experience, and they continue to be so for me. So, like for you, what were some of those formative books?
Well, I was definitely a Stephen King reader. I mean, I remember reading the third Dark Tower, about the last 400 pages in one, 3 or 4 hour, Sunday afternoon stint or whatever, and writing Stephen King a letter like, when's the next Dark Tower going to come out, and getting some form letter back. And I think it was so awesome. But then I felt this change happen. I think I was sophomore in high school, and a cool older friend, he asked me if I'd ever heard of Kurt Vonnegut in Slaughterhouse-Five, or Tom Robbins and even Cowgirls Get the Blues, and I
Hmm.
hadn't. But something, when the bearded poster child hippie senior asked me about it, something inside of me really was interested in these books he was recommending. And I found Slaughterhouse-Five at the local library where my mom worked and was working at the time. And I read that book. And by the end of it, uh, I felt like there was some chemical brain change that happened. And I just leapt into a whole different tier of literature that was way different than anything I was reading before. And I discovered the beats, and through other friends, like Milan Kundera, and just all these kind of countercultural authors. And I feel like they became a key, crucial part of my journey to, like, I want to say, like, finding my way back to the the unwritten, the oral, living literature of my people, because they were they were they were they were introducing me to this soul culture. They were introducing me to this counterculture where the fullness of who you really are is directly expressed in your art. So instead of backseating portions of yourself, which was, so much of the kind of, I felt like what I was getting from school, all these guys were all about, front seating your essence and then making your art from there. And I think that was just, it was so helpful for me, I was like a visual artist. I wanted to be a comic book artist for a long time. So I kind of had a lot of different interests. Could I make a horror film someday? I had aspiring horror filmmaker buddies with their camcorders and stuff like that. So really, the Beats, Kurt Vonnegut, all those counterculture folks, even getting to Alan Watts, Robert Anton Wilson. I read all his books in high school. All of those guys really became my educators, and I felt like they were educating me and all inspiring me to locate, you know, the gist, the essence of yourself, and put all that power into your art. And then that almost like created this feedback loop of your, even though my art was not that great, the art I made from that deep place fed the deep place. And then all of a
Mhm.
sudden it's like you learn how to become like this food maker for yourself, you know, and then you're a food maker for your buddies and your buddies are food makers for you. And then all of a sudden you got a gang, you know, with dreams, a gang with visions, and you're not so outnumbered by all the giants in the middle who are ruling the middle of nowhere,
Mm.
you know. And I
Man,
still love them all. So I love Stephen King. I love all, you know, you love all the ones who helped you along the way, you know.
yeah, yeah, yeah. There's so many parallels in our story. I was born in 74, so I grew up in the 80s and came of age in the 90s. And, a couple friends of mine and I would make horror movies on VHS recorders that one of their parents had. Um, and Same books. I remember somebody turning me on to Tom Robbins, and it was like a whole nother world opened up because he was talking about all this like mysterious, esoteric stuff, and it was like sending me down all these rabbit holes about the dog star Sirius and all this kind of stuff. And like you said, it was like feeding a part of my soul that had been famished for so long. And I feel like some of these writers, I think of them now as kind of spiritual aunties and uncles who are like
Mm.
initiating me into these other aspects of life and kind of giving me encouragement to be myself and to not be afraid to be weird and different because there's so much richness and joy in all of the stuff that doesn't fit into dominant culture. And so I'm like eternally grateful to these writers who left these like kind of like portals or breadcrumbs along the way to, you find the book and the book helps you find out who you are, you know? So I can relate so much to what you're saying, man.
And I guess that's, you know, that's why we're so inspired to do our part in carving out our breadcrumbs that we're going to launch into the world or leave behind us. It's such a beautiful tradition to be a part of. Like, be a breadcrumb creator for all the other souls that are out there so they can find their way, find their thing, find their purpose, and find the stuff that they're here for. You know, it's a
Hmm.
cool tradition to be a part of.
Yeah, totally. Leaving some breadcrumbs behind for somebody who's lost in the wilderness of modernity to pick up on and go, oh wait, there's something else.
Uh-huh.
And what happens? What kind of adventure waits for me if I just follow this? If I trust this feeling in me, this feeling of like rightness and calling, to just have the courage to follow it and see where it takes me.
Totally.
So, so what were some of the first? Okay, let's deal with this first.
Yeah.
In your writing, you use the word Indian a lot,
Mm.
and we're told up here that Indian is a bad word. It's like akin to the N word for black people, right? And it's always changing up here in Canada what to call the first people of this place. And currently, the accepted word seems to be indigenous. In the past, it's been First Nations. Before that, maybe it was Native. Um, so you use a lot of these words at various times. I mean, what are you most comfortable with in that respect?
I I kind of in this context, I kind of love this question, and I'm uh, interested to see where this answer goes. I wrote a poem, I think about 2 years ago. I was invited to do a reading for a van life community outside of Port Townsend, and it was really fun. It was really different by the fire with like 20 van life people. And after returning from that reading, I wrote this poem, and the first line of the poem is Indian, Native, or Indigenous. How many times do I have to answer this? Because it's a really common question. I everywhere I go, people are always asking it, and I think because compacted or compressed inside of it is so much relevant stuff that we either really feel or intuitively feel or subconsciously feel. And it's a great place to start this conversation, especially for folks who maybe, haven't spent a lot of time in this conversation and they want to improve their understanding. They want to be on the side of justice. They don't want to be on the side of uh, mistreatment of any culture,
Hmm.
let alone the culture that was here for 20, 30,000 years in the place that now they're making their homes that they love. So it's complex, and I can only speak for myself, and because it changes from person to person for a variety of reasons. But first off, I'll say this, growing up, it was always Indian. So my grandpa, my dad, my aunts, my uncles, everything was Indian, Indian, Indian. And so when you hear all of your own family, all of your own tribe, and then as I got older and I started, in my 20s, I started getting into my people's ways, into our ceremonies. And so you get to hang out with elders, you get to hang out with medicine people, you get to hang out with, people who have, been doing the thing for a half a century or more. They say the word Indian too, all for that first, giant chunk of my life. That word becomes infused almost with the content of every conversation where it was used. So the word itself is almost like, man, it's almost like a holy thing, a beautiful thing. It's a shorthand entryway for any and every conversation you've ever had with any person who used that word. So it's endowed with or imbued with just an ocean of meaning. And then in the 2000s, like the late 2000, the aughts, as they say, you know, and social media coming online. I love social media. I feel like it's accelerated a lot of education. It has its downsides and stuff, but it's accelerated a lot of mass education around these different things. And so
Hmm.
native started becoming really popular, and for all sorts of different reasons. And I remember like watching the change happen among my own people, and it was especially happening among the young people. And now that's probably in the past. I want to say like 6 or 7 years, indigenous has really come online, and it's the word. And I guess I kind of use them interchangeably, depending on context, depending on who I'm talking to. But when I go back home, even to, I'm out in Astoria, Oregon now on the Oregon coast, but I go back to Nebraska, once or twice a year for different things, powwows and ceremony and stuff like that. When I go back, all of my family still says Indian. So they're still using that word. So I guess I just carry it with me as I know it, and I'm reluctant to let go of it. It's a volume, it's a
Hmm.
volume full of so much. But there was a well-known writer. He's a regular customer of mine. I work at the Astoria Co-op, and he asked me this. His name is Robert Michael Pyle. And he asked me, he said, "What do you think about this word Indian?" And he's a non-native guy. And I kind of thought another good answer came up in the moment. And it was, we natives are pretty sensitive to the spirit that is present when a particular word is being used by a non-native. And the spirit that we respect is the spirit of respect. And if that word is being used in an unexamined way, if that word is being used and there's an absence of respect, that's where it hurts. That's
Hmm.
where it needs to change. That's where, you should maybe use native or you should use indigenous. The word native and indigenous, those two words don't have as tricky histories. So it's probably recommended to use them more often than not. But that's some of my story on these three words. And yeah, I like talking about them because we're growing this conversation that's full of understanding that benefits everybody, natives and non-natives alike. And that's really uh, what it's good to be about. It's good to be a person who's about that type of conversation.
Hmm. Yeah, thanks for that. I appreciate that. Um, I'm part of a society here, a nonprofit that works out of a community school here. and the community schools right across the road from the Sioux Nation,
Hmm.
from the reserve. And so it's on native land. And one of the conversations we're having on the board right now is about, this buzzword reconciliation
Hmm.
here in Canada. And I think, this board is a little late to the game in terms of addressing that. But we're having a lot of conversations and really struggling with like the best way forward, like the proper way to learn, like what to learn, what brings us closer to this idea of reconciliation, which in itself I find kind of a problematic word because it assumes that at some point there was conciliation
Hmm.
between settlers and indigenous people. And I don't think that ever existed. So the idea that we're going to reconcile anything, I mean, we have to start
Hmm.
first with conciliation. And so trying to figure out in this day and age with the complex relationships that we have between settlers and indigenous people, what does that even look like? And so we're really wrestling with this. And I'd love to hear if you have any ideas around that.
Wow. I mean, such a I want to say a big topic. Two things come to mind. In my late 20s, there were some cool there was a couple cool non-native professors back in Lincoln, Nebraska, where I lived for 15 years. And I mean, I was kind of a part of the activism scene and kind of showing up at all these different native rallies. And it was part of my, education, just really just hanging out with other natives and doing what the other natives were doing and learning about native reality today. And these professors invited me to speak to their kids, their classes, the native lit classes, and I think they were called Indian Studies classes, native and yeah, native lit and Indian Studies classes. I was very nervous to do so. In hindsight, very glad I did. It's kind of how I got into sharing and speaking about this stuff. But I'd go in there and I would talk to the classroom, and it was an awesome experience. It felt good to me to speak from my heart about my people's lived reality. I felt like you could feel like it made a medicine that was really received. But, almost without fail, I could tell that it was the first experience for all uh, 30 to 40 students of them ever hearing a native person in the flesh or a native person in person talk about native reality, you know? And that seeing that time and time again, just how absent actual native reality was from the consciousness and being of your average American, really put into perspective just like uh just how absent it is everywhere. It was just another instance of that, you know, absence of us, how thoroughly we had been erased, and how your average everyday people just don't know anything about us. And well, I think I lost for a second there. I lost the second thing that came to mind, but uh, oh, the second thing that came to mind was when I started seeing the land back stuff a couple years ago. You started seeing hashtag land back, and I guess I'm 44. I'm not incredibly old dude, but I had been around this stuff long enough that even I just thought this is, I guess comparing and contrasting those speaking engagements where you're like reading the room and you're seeing this is like this is the first grain of sand on an empty beach of, understood native reality for all these folks, and it's emblematic of the entire country maybe, and then comparing and contrasting that with the land back stuff. And I thought, this is never going to catch traction. I felt like that about some of my own people who were like pouring all their power, pouring all their energy, pouring all their savvy, pouring all their creative intelligence into it. And then lo and behold, it did catch traction and it did become a reality. And now it's so commonplace that you can't keep track of it. There's instances all around America where people or organizations are either setting it up so that when they're gone, private homeowners, their land will return to the local tribe who may or may not have a reservation, or different organizations who have had, stretches of land sitting unused, they're doing the same. Here across the river, there's a place called the Nacelle Youth Camp, which I think was a detention center that's been out of use since the 80s, and it's currently being returned to the Chinook tribe, so that that whole property and all the buildings on it that's been sitting there unused for 30 or 40 years, that's on traditional Chinook land, it's going to be given to them. I mean, it's not like you know, a quarter of an acre land back. So I feel like I was surprised and I had to embrace, you know, the place where maybe a big portion of non-Indian folks actually are. There is this kind of enlightenment happening. Now, as far as the best methods, the best means, the best ways of going about it, it's like it's like digging in the mud for. Can you swear on this podcast?
Oh yeah.
Okay, it's like digging in the mud for the shit you lost. There's no way to go
Mm,
about finding the best methods, means, ways, and yeah, just ways of going about it, but digging into the mud to discover it, as groups, as individuals, as communities, as families. And what happens is that mud has been waiting for people to dig into it for a long time. And all the shit inside of it has been waiting an even longer time. It wants to be found, it wants to be reintegrated. And it is the stuff that inspires better behavior, better relations. And it's just like the Indian, native, indigenous. It will inspire more on point terminology. It will inspire shared vocabulary that brings positive feelings to both the hearts of both sides. It's all, and this is alchemically kind of calling in all the different ingredients required to create, best possible outcomes that maybe even match up with visions folks have been carrying for a long time.
mm,
So I don't know myself. I always think, to me, it's a beautiful thing to not have all the answers. It's a beautiful thing to not know everything. It's a beautiful thing to know what you know and know what you don't know and contribute to all these different conversations that as a human, we're a part of, contribute to them as we can. So I kind of see that as that's an example that was set by my own people. And this is an example rooted in the value of humility. Be a human, be yourself, give what you can give. But if that's not your area of expertise, stand back. And but we it's like the 80s cartoon, but like Captain Planet, with all our powers combined, we can create something borderline supernatural, you know?
mm.
So I don't know, but I like being a part of these conversations.
Yeah, getting in the mud and digging for the shit that's been waiting to be unearthed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's mud in everyone's backyard, so go get dirty, go dig in it.
Yeah, if only people would remember that. I think one of the issues that does come up, and I've seen this in when conversations among mixed people comes up, and it's again, it's like the language is so difficult because now we're to refer to the original people of this land as indigenous, and but that to me sets up this binary. There's indigenous and there's non-indigenous. And what that doesn't do is acknowledge the diversity within each of those groups
Mm.
and the kind of the varied histories that everybody brings to the table, no matter where they're from. And, so many of us are just kind of mixed up, like mixed race
Mm.
mutts. So, like, I have a problem with some of that language. Like, right now, it's the indigenous and the settlers. And the settlers are everybody else, no matter if you came from India or Germany or England or South America. And I don't know if that gets us toward any kind of conciliation. So what I've been preferring lately is to ask people about specifically like where their people come from, you know? And I think that's a step toward us respecting each other as individuals with a whole kind of trail of people behind us, and many different lines and branches that may stem off of that. Um, that's been a part of like what I've been going through is struggling with these terms and wanting to bring more differentiation, more detail. And but that takes time because if I'm going to introduce myself and really be accountable for who I am and who comes before me, it's complicated. And so people got to have like some patience and indulgence for to understand that. It just seems too kind of simple and blunt to call myself a settler, because I don't feel like that respects the people that I come from. And if we're trying to build this bridge of understanding and respect, I think we need to take some more time to really find out like who's in front of us and who's behind them. Um, any thoughts about that?
Uh, yeah, totally. I mean, lots of thoughts. But the f- maybe uh, the first and foremost thought, which is maybe the first and foremost thought of this entire conversation, implicitly at the beginning and now explicitly now, is that I think we have to locate the depths of our humanity and then generate our conversation from there. Because when we locate the depths of our humanity, uh, suddenly we're seeing all the unifying elements
Hmm.
of all the different people who are in this conversation or any conversation. And I think with so many different forces out there, you know, mm, expertly dividing people, diminishing people, disempowering people, it's cool. And cool as a code word for holy, it's cool to source your conversation contributions from the depths of humanity, where there's this energy of how are we similar, how can we work together, how can we honor each other, how can we respect each other, and what can we do together. Like, let's have a conversation about this, and let's find words that are actually deemed constructive by, let's obliterate both and say all sides. And I think as a poet and as a writer, I myself find myself doing that. And sometimes that may put you like ahead of the curve. Sometimes that may exclude you from the party. Sometimes because we're all just people, sometimes that may put you a couple steps behind. All me catching up to the land back reality, you know? So I myself, I've never been, I when these things come up, I myself are do what you do as a writer, and it's like, let's find a different way to look at this. Because I mean, truth be told, my day job is I talk with my customers for 8 hours a day about all the stuff going on here in our Goonies town, Astoria, Oregon, and I do all kinds of native stuff around in the area. It's like, oh, if every imaginable type of person wants to talk to me about native stuff, and it's almost like a martial art. Some of those conversations are 30 seconds, some are a couple minutes, some go directly to the most sensitive stuff I carry inside of me, and some are connected to the just most common stuff people want to talk to an Indian about, or a native about, or Ponca about, for that matter.
Your gesture when you
So,
did that, when you said that, is funny. It's like
so
all
it's
of a
like,
sudden this like kind of reverence, like I'm speaking to a real Indian here and
yeah, let's talk to an Indian. Talk to an Indian about it. I
get
do
some
joke about that
wisdom.
sometimes. Ask an Indian. But so it becomes like a martial art form to come up with the
Mm,
language in the moment that works better than just like the language that has been sitting around forever. And I personally, I think as a writer or poet or a dude has some interest in originality, however possible or impossible that particular endeavor is, uh, I shy away from the words that become I want to say like the weaponized trending words, the weaponized buzzwords, the overloaded, yeah, the overloaded kind of trendy words that don't hold enough or held a lot but don't hold enough now. I
Hmm.
myself, I basically I have this long way of saying like I don't say settler. I'm not interested in that myself. I rarely say that. I think like you said, it's too it's I want to say it's like
Like too homogenizing, maybe is the word comes up
I
for
want
me.
I want to say it's like flicking when we need launching. It's too
Mm.
small powered, you know? It doesn't it's not expansive enough. Yes, yes. But I also want to say like to what you're saying too, like when I always talk about we're mutts. I like to say we're a, a mosaic of our ancestry. We've got to fall in love with ourselves and all the different strains and strands and histories that we carry. Because, like you said, I my dad is Ponca, Yankton Sioux, Santee Sioux, and Chippewa, and my mom is German, Irish, and Portuguese. Like we are all these mosaics of times and places and cultures and ancestries. And I think some of the biggest medicine that's needed today, speaking as a native person, but also just as a human, is there needs to be this reconnection to the living wisdom of our living ancestors. And us native people, we're big into that. Our ancestors, they're not in the distant past, they're in the room with us. They're not a long time ago. They're in the kitchen with us when we're drinking our coffee. They're in our dreams. They're in our ceremonies. They're living um, they're just alive in our lives. And when you talk to them, they say, turn around and bathe the past in love. And one version of turning around and bathing the past in love so the past can be healed, so you can be a human that's healing history. One version of that is like you said, let's find language that allows us to honor the bigness of what we really are and get away from this flattening, one-dimensionalizing, divisive, buzzwordy language, you
Mm.
know?
Hmm.
So I'm so it's such a big thing what you asked. So thanks
Mm.
for asking it, you know?
Yeah, well, thanks for your response, man. Yeah, I just think of them as dumb words
There you go.
because they don't work really hard and they keep people who use them from doing the work of really digging into what that word is trying to represent, you know?
You
It's like
said it right there. Yep.
it's like a stand-in for a whole complex reality. And like you said, it's just not, they're not big enough. They flatten, they diminish. And it's just a way of not really dealing with, everything that's there. Um, yeah. I was thinking like, in this kind of talk about reconciliation with the board members, talking about there's people, it's like a profession now, right? People who have taken up this or created this new job or career as like a reconciliation consultant. And they get paid a lot of money by organizations who want to do the right thing, you know? Um, and so it's become like professionalized.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I think like has helped me is reading.
Hmm.
Kind of like the thread that's been going through this whole conversation, like the what reading does for you, what it does to you. And so reading native authors early on and throughout my life, I think has allowed me to like at least maybe walk a few steps in other people's shoes or moccasins.
Hmm.
Uh, and not just like the native writers, but any fictional or biographical or historical writing I've read opens up my perspective on other people and the world. And I think reading, especially like reading good fiction that really pulls you into the story inside the protagonist's experience, I think it builds empathy.
Big time. I mean, that's what's making what I mean, as I was listening to, oh, I mean, it's only one part, but it's such a good strong part to develop a capacity for reflection, to develop a capacity for thoughtfulness, develop a capacity to be thoughtful with the sincere human interests of others in mind. What an interesting thing to be able to take off the shelf of your psyche and say, well, I'm not sure what to do here, but I am going to go forward with this in my hands, this reflectiveness, this thoughtfulness, and just what will that I was just say, like, what will that bring out of others? What will that bring into this situation? The to reflect, which is such a big, has this other, an analog or relative, we'll say, a sibling, this sibling that's so needed in these times, and that's to slow down. What if we slow down before we talk, or we slow down before we act, or we slow down before we make the decision? I feel like that's such a, just like you were talking about this, the settler word and these other words. It's a counter movement to the unhelpful momentum that this stuff has, that's pushing too many of the things too fast, too fastly. I don't know if that's right. Too fastly forward, and just getting the rest, getting everything we care about caught in the gears and caught in the wheels and run over. You know,
Mm.
I think that's just one thing that comes from, like you said, good reading. As well as what you're talking about, caring for characters and realizing we're all actually characters and we should care for each other.
Mm. And I mean, what reading has really done for me is find that common element of shared humanity. There's always something to relate to in these books, even if the kind of material aspects of the person's story and reality are different. At the core of us, we are all people who love and want to be loved, who grapple with who we are, what we're here for, where we come from, all of these big questions. And it's one of the things that I get from your writing. It's like, man, this guy feels like a brother, especially when you start, saying stuff like "cool" is a code word for holy. Like, dude, I'm gonna borrow that one. That's
It's
really
all
good.
yours.
Because that's our language, right? From when we grew up. And I think there's something about that is like taking the language that is like natural for us, common for us, and not throwing it out in place of like better, more sacred words or more intellectual words, just to be real. And like the way that we talk reflects where we come from and when we come from, and who influenced us. So, like cleaning all that up too much, in service of seeming more like an authority or something like that, or smarter than we are. I think there's something to that. I never really thought about that before, but just being real with your language and how much that reflects who you are and where you're coming from and who you come from. Like when you're talking about this word Indian and how it holds so much for you and your family. Like just imagining that, like, well, yeah, there's got to be this thing about like it was it was a term of denigration. Once upon a time, it was a term that comes from ignorance. Ignorance of Columbus thinking he landed in India. And like it's like kind of it's a really fucked up word, but then I can imagine that maybe at some point there's like some power gained by reclaiming that word as a source of like pride and resilience or something. So I don't know. Like I'm just kind of imagining what a word like that could hold for someone like you.
I mean, now you're talking to me. I'm just thinking about, man, when I use that word, and I never use it lightly because of everything that we've discussed today. But when I use that word, there's almost like a instantaneous spiritual time travel that spontaneously happens inside my being, and it feels like empowering because I'm suddenly connecting with all these people who live inside of me and live in my heart and live in my memory. And I have a lot of relatives who lives inside of me because I love my people so much. And so when I'm talking, I'm remembering them, I'm thinking of them, and I feel like we're all talking together. So that happens when I use that word, you know? So that I mean that what a powerful thing for a piece of language to do, and I guess it is like what you're saying. It's like, the word might have started off as this object. I'm not thinking like sci-fi movies. Like the word was created as this object to enslave, to smash, to memory erase, to corral, to demonize, to belittle, to dehumanize. And all these different people were walking around this object, using it, like transmitting some light from some dark place of their own, monster filled, unhealed, grief and mortal wounding. But then, because the earth made us and the earth endowed us, and I'm gonna say all of us, but in this story, in this sci-fi movie, endowed the people of Turtle Island with so much love, so much intelligence, so much humanity, so much sacredness, so much ingenuity, the heart of our indigenosity located ways that it could absorb and assimilate that weaponized object and one day turn it into a medicine object that we could sit beside the medicine objects we'd been carrying since the beginning.
Hmm.
And so suddenly now that word is a medicine object, and in the right hands for the right people, but not for everybody, because this world is too variegated, is too diverse for that to be the case, and probably joyously so and purposely so. But in the right hands, sometimes that word has become a medicine object, and it enables instantaneous spiritual time travel and ancestor communion that empowers the person who uses it. And damn, doesn't that feel good? So it's undoing all that stuff that object was invented to do. It's
Oh,
undoing it, So that's kind of what it makes me think of, in this sci-fi movie moment we're having with our the collaboration of our imaginations and spirits.
dude. Yeah, preach.
Well, I read a lot of comic books. I've watched a lot of movies, so I've got a lot of that sacred stuff running around inside me too, trying to collaborate with all these old Indians. So we come up with this stuff. This is what we come up with.
That's great, man. Let's stick with the power of words for a little while. I
Yeah.
didn't expect us to go here or get dragged here, taken here, but here we are. And it's I think about words a lot. I think there's so much that we can learn from digging into the roots of the words that we commonly use. And one of the words that I have a problem with is the designation of white.
Hmm.
I find it really, I have a lot of resistance anyway to identifying as white because white is one of these power words that was created in order to separate people and to raise up one class of people as better, more pure, chosen by God. Like I think for me, like if we really want to, if we're sincere about toppling white supremacy, we got to start with that word white, or
Mm,
that category of white. Um, like it itself is a product and a tool of colonization. And like for me personally, like when it first started to really rub against me is when I was doing my own kind of research into my ancestry and realizing that I was this European mutt. And so that the word white just kind of whitewashed my whole history, my whole ancestry, just kind of wiped it out, made it nothing. And there's also like a blankness to white. It's like I got no culture if I'm white, you know? And I think that to me is part of the way Christianity colonized,
mm,
originally colonizing indigenous European people. It's kind of like wiping out all the past, like literally by wiping out temples and monuments to all the very gods, and then wiping out any kind of traditional practices and all of that. And I don't feel like a white person. I feel like I got a lot of color in me, um, and my ancestors did too. They weren't Christian all the way down, you know? And particularly this particularly white version of Christianity called Protestantism. You know, no idols, no symbols, no incense, none of that stuff. Just a minimalist cross on the wall. That's about all you're allowed. So I've had the problem with this white. And then for me, like, you're talking about Indian becoming this medicine word. For me, mutt is like a medicine word because like I'm a dog person, right? And I know that mutts are the strongest, most resilient non-breeds, right?
mm.
Like they're a mix of all these other breeds that have survived, and gone through like like evolutionary competition to to succeed evolutionarily. And so yeah, I've just been, just the term a Euro mutt for me, it brings a lot to it and might
Mm.
provoke some curiosity, like, huh? Like if I just say white, people go, oh yeah, 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 white guy, you know?
Mm.
But if I say European mutt, they go, oh, like really? Like who are your people? And then I can get into like, the kind of diversity within that. And so there's something about mutt to me that speaks to the power or the strength of diversity, actually, which I think in like the broader conversation is is a good idea, you know?
Well, I think man, and this is where I myself don't have all the architecture and contours of this mapped out. I mean, I'm another one of those guys who's out there trying to figure this stuff out. But the one thing the indigenous or the Turtle Island conversation is that, I think, and I think if, help me out here, I guess, it's just it's like the most recent, the
Hmm.
most freshest abomination example of what has happened to, I want to say all people, but what has happened to a majority of modern people, so it's still like the wreckage is still smoking when it comes
Yeah.
to my tribe, the Ponca tribe. But so it's like we almost want to examine that, and all of a sudden we can elaborate or extrapolate out if we have the right lens and see that, this was actually your story too. Just the wreckage is long gone, seemingly long gone.
Yeah.
But if
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
do start to endeavor to do some of the same work that a lot of us indigenous people are doing today, you'll discover all the same stuff that we are.
Hmm.
Your ancestors never left you, that they're still there, that you have a rich history. You come from a place. You have all of this. I do like the work of Malidoma Somé and Martine Proctel. You have all of this indigenosity inside of you that's calling all of this configuration of external life to you so that you can be a strand slash stream of this indigenous regeneration in your particular form and person, you know? So I kind of I feel that, and I also feel like we just people are longing to have color, texture, substance, and soul
Hmm.
restored to this very conversation because all of those things are bridge building elements back to these realities that have never disappeared and can never disappear for anyone, even if that means your version of having it restored to you is piecemeal, or it is a grab bag, or it is, just heartbreakingly imperfect. It's still a regenerated version that your soul can utilize. It's an instrument your soul can utilize to sing the song you came here to sing that can have a healing effect on all the other fractally placed people that are your relatives in the great hoop of life, you know? So I feel like we have to follow those itches because that's what we're itching for, a restoration of soul, regardless of who we are, skin color or ancestry, because the soul has so much genius inside of it for all of this stuff we're talking about. And the soul desires to have its genius online in these times where so much of the mass culture is about taking the soul offline so
Hmm.
that the mass culture can destroy the earth.
Yeah, but first possess the vessel,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
kind of take over the vessel like one of those parasites that gets into the grasshopper and makes the grasshopper jump into the pond so that it can be eaten by the fish. And,
Whoa.
there's
Yeah.
some like real life sci-fi for
Whoa.
you, brother.
Whoa. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I totally I feel what you're saying. Like when you do start digging into your own patch of mud and you start recovering some of your soul through your ancestral line and all that, I think of it sometimes as like a archaeology of the soul. It's like you go digging in that mud and you might just find like a little fragment that has like just a little piece of a larger picture on it, and that's all you got to work with, right? Because it's buried under 2,000 years of oppression.
Mm.
But it's something. It's still something. Like if you were an archaeologist and you were digging up a spot and you found a little shard that had like this little glimpse of something else on it, you would be so excited, especially if it was like of a culture you never heard of before. Like that would be a profound find, and you would take that back and you would imagine what the rest of the thing looks like. Maybe it was a vase or a plate, and maybe this little thing is like the knee of a god who, and I think
Mm.
so. Imagination for me has got to be a part of it because imagination, I think, comes from the ancestors, and
Mm.
they're feeding us information and guidance through imagination. And so to discount imagination is just, making stuff up. I think does us a disservice, in this soul recovery project. But like the fact of the matter is, for us European people, if we want to get back to our original medicine, all we're gonna find is like these little fragments, But like the message I want to send to people is to like treat those as like precious finds, and allow your imagination to fill in the blanks and allow it to be perfectly imperfect, It's like that Japanese art of repairing broken pottery.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, where they fill in the cracks with pure gold. It's
Hmm.
something like that, Imagination is kind of like that, I think.
I think it's like you're saying, we might not have all the pieces of the pot, but something that we do have because this cosmos is ultimately spiritual in nature and designed to care for us, to care for life. We do have the resource of that gold that can compensate for the pieces we don't have so we can create that pot. And the other thing that makes me think of is, and this connects to so many examples in my own life. Uh, but I just think, the smallest thing, the smallest thing has the power to help us become ourselves, you know? So you might, I always, It's like sometimes when I go pray, I'll bring some corn with me, some of my people's corn. And I've been in situations sometimes before I give a talk or something. I'm in a place I've never been before. I'm just myself. I kind of dress pretty regular, but I got one piece of my people's corn, and I pray with that. And to me, I feel maybe that's all you got. Like you said, that one piece of pottery, but that tiny, 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 tiny thing, if you pray with it, it has the power to help you become yourself. And
Mm,
then you become uh, someone who helps other people become themselves. And it's going to become incrementally, increasingly they an increasing incrementally increasing thing. Like maybe they'll be more of themselves than you could have ever been of yourself. And that connects to my family and my tribe, watching how we lost our stuff, and how the stuff, now you're watching the stuff come back a little more every generation. And somehow that's the role we're playing. We have the tiniest little thing, but that tiny thing, it can help us to become ourselves. And then the other people on the same journey, because then we can pour our help or pour what we have to give to them into their journey, to their quest, their life. Maybe they'll be even that much more themselves. To me, that's the big, beautiful tradition of actual life, the big, beautiful tradition at the heart of life's actual story. And so we're repositioning ourselves so that we're in that tradition, even though to our eyes, to the majority perception, it's this there's other stories that are the big main stories or the big main shows, or the big celebrities of the times. But those are contained by the big actual story of the earth and cosmos. And we have the smallest things can reposition us. So we're living in that story. And
mm,
then we source what we have to give. We source what we have to contribute from the positioning of that story. That's the story. That's the positioning of our ancestors when they were located in the center of it, when their culture was located in the center of it, when their spirituality was located in the center of that. And I'm not speaking just for myself. I'm talking about what we're talking about. So it's like you said, the smallest thing can help us become ourselves and then reposition ourselves into I want to say like the geolocation, the geolocation that our people behind us called home, then
mm,
suddenly home is a real thing to us, when you're
mm,
home, when you're at home, uh man, you behave completely differently. You're not lost, you're not untethered, you're not totally obsessed with yourself. You start to have some generosity because you have so much appreciation for all the good feelings that being home is constantly filling you with, you know?
mm. Yeah. When you're at home, you can hopefully take off your shoes, kick back, and relax a little bit.
Yeah, totally. And have great conversations with great brothers and
Yeah.
sisters and such, like just like this one.
Yeah. Just like meandering conversations that take you for a ride.
Totally.
You know,
Yeah,
if you
who's
just,
driving this car anyway?
hey man, it ain't me or you.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I talk
man.
about that a lot in the counseling work that I do with people, that there's some
Oh.
third element in a good medicine conversation that comes
Hmm.
in and directs the conversation.
Hmm.
And if you allow yourself to not just get taken for a ride, like I feel like we are called to participate,
Hmm.
but kind of like our hands are lightly on the wheel, they're
Hmm.
not gripping the wheel and like staying true to the course that, I've set out before me, but it's like hands are lightly on the wheel so you can be responsive,
Hmm.
but maybe also, your tires fall into a rut and end up veering you off the intended course, and to allow yourself to go there and see. Maybe you get a little lost in the wilderness, and then there's an impulse like, how do we find our way back? I know there's people listening and this is a podcast, and what's the theme going to be? What am I going to call it? We got to steer this thing back
Uh.
on track, but I don't know. I'm okay with just, you know, getting
I
taken out into the wilderness, man.
I'm so I write a lot of poetry, and so grateful for it. I love writing poems. I feel, a poem is a place where a piece of your soul can live, and anyone who reads it gets to taste of that soul and have their own soul nourished, reactivated, reawakened, or just have a moment of life relishment. I love poetry. I love talking about poetry. And one of the things I always think about when it comes to poems is where do poems come from? Where do any of these poems come from? You know, I always think it's like sometimes I write poems on my break at work. I write poems, at all times, everywhere. And it really is like your mind is this kind of still lake, and this tiny, tiny snowflake of a thing that's smaller than a snowflake comes from somewhere and drops into your mind and then causes all the ripples. And then somehow it like spins out or designs itself out into another poem. And I feel like these conversations are the same way, the where does this stuff come from? And that's another way of saying, or actually that's kind of another, that's like taking a person halfway there, because that hopefully one day they'll take themselves the rest of the way there. But it's another way of saying, like, where does any of this stuff come from? It comes from a great, mysterious, sacred source, that this source that's giving life to existence all the time, everywhere, in every moment. And it's worth getting to know that source. However, you're called to get to know it,
Mm.
find a way to commune with that source, to spend time with that source, to ponder up into the infinite reality of that source and see what pours back down into you and your life. And it might be something like writing a poem. It might be something more traditional, like going to make a prayer outside, or learning to meditate, or uh, offering some tobacco to your ancestors. Like, this is the stuff I like to talk about. And I think it's
Mm.
just like what you're talking about. It's a great thing to become friends with that third element. The third element is, we're the people in the room, but the third element is the door. And we're not here to just bore each other with the shit we already know. We're looking towards that door where the great mystery can walk through, or an emissary of the great mystery can walk through, or maybe one of our ancestors can walk through, or maybe some animal that's going to become, one of our raddest friends. We just haven't got to really know them yet. We might become, friends with slow moving turtles and decide we want to move slow like a turtle too. Think
Mhm.
about a thought, think one good thought a week, but then after years become full of so many good thoughts that everybody around us is asking, how do you got so many damn good thoughts like that? Well,
One a week.
I one a
That's
week,
it.
man. Get off the interstate, get on the ground,
Yeah,
you
get
know?
off the rabbit track of trying to
Yeah.
gobble up 100 new ideas a day.
Yeah.
Be
Yeah.
be
Throw
okay with one a week, maybe.
one a week.
Maybe.
If you're lucky.
If you're lucky.
If you're lucky. If you keep the right door open. You keep the right door open.
Yeah, man. Yeah, keeping that door open. That to me is like what like quote unquote spiritual practice is all about, is about keeping the door open. I was um I was reading about, Frank Foolscrow. You ever heard of
Oh
him?
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, fascinating dude, right? Um, but I was reading about him because I came across this phrase, hollow bone.
Mm.
And that set me off on this whole thing, just contemplating that. And, like, to me, it just seems so profound, and it's like the kind of big idea you could shape your life around,
Mm.
right? So, like, my understanding of that is, well, it goes deep, and it even took me back to my own ancestry,
Mm.
way back in pre-Christian Germany, where they found one of the oldest musical instruments ever, and it's a flute that's carved out of I think a leg bone of a bird. This little tiny flute.
Mm.
Found it in a cave. It's, however many tens of thousands of years old. And I thought, that's what Frank Foolscrow's talking about with the hollow
Mm.
bone. It's like, how does a flute make sound? It's like we got to blow breath into it, right? And breath in most traditions is the same as spirit.
Mm.
right? It's what our breath is what gives us life. So it's the most immediate way for us to connect with creative, life-giving spirit. Just, oh my God, I breathe in and I live. If I
Hmm.
don't breathe in, I don't live, right? It's
Hmm.
so essential. It's so fundamental. So I've been constantly, I'm walking around with this idea of Frank Foolscrow, who's this guy, this idea of the hollow bone, and like the bone is like a flute, right? And so then this little prayer came to me. And it's one of those things, like you leave the door open, an ancestor might walk through and give you a gift,
Hmm.
you know? And so I imagine that this prayer is maybe much older than myself, you
Hmm.
know? But it goes, empty me so that I can be an instrument of truth, love, and beauty,
Hmm.
so that I can be this hollow bone flute that spirit can play through. And I mean, that to me is like, that's my prayer. Where did that come from? I didn't get it verbatim from Frank's Foolcrow. I mean, he just brought in this image of the hollow bone, you know,
Yeah.
and then imagination took me to an ancient cave in Germany, you know, where somebody was like cleaning up the bones from the kill and thought, huh, what if, you know, what if I just try to like my God. And then the first guy to blow into it, like, hoot, toot, toot. Like, like, whoa, my God, you know?
I want to say like, I mean, a couple different things. Like one, uh, man, there's like, I want to say three things. One, a lot of my relatives knew Fool's Crow, so he is alive inside of me in a lot of different stories. I've heard them share of their time with him, and it's cool to see how alive he is in, I guess I want to say the the oral culture side of our people. So these big beings, these big relatives who did a lot for the people, who did a lot for, life, they're continuing to walk among us in the
Mm.
forms of the stories that are told about him. Like, what a sweet, special, beautiful thing. And two, along those lines, this fits and connects to what we've been talking about with language. It's cool that a piece of his legacy is this image of the hollow bone that has become. Do you want to can we say transcultural, or
Hmm.
that it's essential to our people? Like if we utilize it, and it's like it
It's
means a
like,
lot to
it's
us.
a teaching in itself, right?
Yes, it's a teaching in itself, but it's cool that it has he was so powerful that this piece, among many other pieces of his legacy, have traveled out and become something that can be utilized and is inspirational in nature. And it's like what we're talking about. It's more specific. It's like it's a created image as opposed to the flattened buzzword or the no work word, you know?
Hmm. Yeah.
That's awesome. And then three, man, it's really beautiful what you shared because to me, with the understanding that I have from my culture, like our prayers, this you could say this even better, but I'm going to say it like this. Our prayers assume form in the other world. So they elaborate or flower themselves out into living, animated, substantial form in the spirit world. So we might say, like, help our relative. We'll just say that as an example. That's usually we say more than help our relative, but so with those three words, help our relative, and then the moment we've said them, they've come and gone. We're back. We're doing our life, or we finish praying or whatever. But in the other world, those three words, they have like 3D inhabited substance. So it's beautiful to hear your prayer because it's so specific and it's this articulation that I want to say it's this articulation that on many different points aligns itself and yourself with the heart of all creation. What a beautiful thing to be able to do. What a beautiful thing to be inspired to do. And this is again, I want to say like this repositioning work for our consciousness and our spirit. You say a prayer like that, you create this articulation in the other world, and that articulation functions as a go between the great spirit and your spirit, and it creates a recalibration. So you're
Mm,
repositioning yourself back into that right story point, back into that right uh, spiritual place.
yeah.
So beautiful what you shared, So and just imagine, to me, this is where I kind of almost like I get into a gratitude land that has no bounds. Like, wow,
Totally,
we
man.
can do that. We
I
can do that.
know. God.
One piece of corn, we can do that. One
Yeah.
inspired, uttered prayer, we can do that. And then that gratitude just cleanses us, and man, we just feel good and happy to be alive.
Reborn. Yeah.
Reborn. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and also like my gratitude extends to Frank Fool's Crow. It's like that word or that image was like a kernel,
Mm.
right? That fruited, that grew, flourished
Mm.
within me in a particular way. It didn't bring me back to some imagined past life as an Indian on Turtle Island. Send me off to the next powwow to find my true roots. It sent
Wow.
me back to a cave in Germany with
Yes.
like the first musicians,
Wow.
and like that's my spiritual ancestry is this line of musicians who work with music to tend the garden of the soul more than make pop songs or whatever. Like music to me has always been sacred, even before I knew
Mm.
enough to call it sacred. But
Mm-hmm.
like people ask me like how I got started on the spiritual journey and that kind of thing. I said sitting in my room when I was 12 years old, playing you know, guitar licks for 8 hours a day. I mean, you want to talk about like asceticism and monasticism, sitting at the feet of Eddie Van Halen and Jimi Hendrix and the rest, learning this like alchemical magical thing called music with this magical instrument, the guitar, and the music that could transport me, just like those
Wow.
books.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, yeah, like you said,
Oh,
all of a sudden, I'm in this like realm of gratitude where it's just like, oh my God.
well, yeah, you make me think it's like, I say, where do these poems come from? I want to say, where does music come from? And I want to say,
Same
music
place.
comes from it comes from the same place it takes us to, right? Music
Huh.
comes from the same place that it takes us to, the ineffable, right? Same place,
I
the
love that.
ineffable,
Where
you
does
know.
music, oh man, what a good answer to that question. Thank you, brother. I'm
It,
gonna
it,
hold on
it,
to that
it
one too.
it's crazy how surrounded we are by all this living mystery, and the living mystery is meant to activate the living mystery inside of us. But the modern culture is so thorough in its removal of us,
Yeah.
removal of ourselves from that living mystery that I mean, I always think like, if you want to connect to the sacred, all you have to do is go out to your backyard and you will be standing on the living ancient earth, and all of her intelligence isn't over across the ocean. It isn't in the exotic place you read about in the book. All of her intelligence, all of her love, all of her ineffable mystery, it's as much in the grass under your feet as it is in all those other places. You're standing on sacred ground. Like, that's how close. And it's probably even closer. Like, I think when I was in my 20s, I was reading some Sufi books, and the Sufis were saying, the creator is closer than your jugular vein. So the sacred is so close. It's all pervading. So it's, as close gets, as everywhere gets. But somehow we need to get ourselves to remembering that. you know.
Yeah, yeah. And a lot of the remembering process is an unremembering of,
Mm,
like you started out talking about the bad stories or the bad myths, right? Yeah, we got to think of like some cool way to say that. I feel like there's something there, some new phrase just waiting to be born in this conversation about like the monstrous myth of modernity or something like that, you know?
yep.
The one
I
that disconnects us from our original medicine and from our
mm,
souls and the soul of the world, you know, it kind of like comes in
mm,
and separates just like shunk.
oof,
And then we got to like somehow take that off of us, you know,
mm,
that endarkening shroud that
mm,
stops us from seeing the mystery of, you know, creation under our feet, in front of our, right in front of our noses, you know? Like I look out the window and I'm like, if you can just look at like a tree or a little squirrel and start to wonder like, how does that squirrel know to get those nuts? And why does that squirrel go and bury those nuts all
mm,
over the place? He ain't got one little cache of nuts, you know? He buries them all over. It's like, well, he's an instrument of creation.
mm,
He's serving that tree, helping to
mm.
propagate that tree all over the place while storing away some food, 90% of which he's going to totally forget about, and that's going to grow into a tree. I mean, if we can start to see
Whoa.
ourselves like that little squirrel and, you know, maybe consciously or
Mm,
intentionally put ourselves in the position to be an instrument of creation,
mm,
I don't know. Probably be doing a lot less harm in the world, for one,
mm-hmm,
you
mm-hmm.
know? And then there's
And I,
that humility aspect that we're not here to dominate, but we're here to be used like an instrument or, you know, a servant of creation.
I love that, just the idea that, and maybe it's not all about ourselves. Like you said, what percentage of the squirrel's life, is about serving this other stuff, and he's not even aware of it. Maybe that's our story too. It's like somehow we're living in a time where everything's so human centered, and I think that's a part of the bad bath that we're all crawling into every day. That's doing the opposite of cleaning us, is kind of dirtying us up
Hmm.
just more and more. We can't see out the windows. We can't even see that squirrel out there. We start to forget that the out there is anywhere, is even out there, and it's just us. What a sad, boring story that goes wrong on itself. The us centered story with none of the other relatives who comprise the giant hoop of actual creation and actual life.
Yeah. And like, you know, maybe looking at that squirrel and seeing like vermin, you know, a pest.
Mm.
I gotta get rid of those squirrels. You know, they keep stealing the bird food, and I want those pretty songbirds outside my window. And here's this nasty little tree rat coming up and stealing all, you know. So I'm gonna poison the squirrel,
Well,
or like put up, you know, wire to keep them out of the thing, or you know, little electroshock wires or something like that, you know. And all of a sudden, we're caught up in this domineering mindset, you know. And we stop being in like playful participation with
mm.
all of it. You know, and if we're in that playful participation, man, it makes life a lot more interesting and joyful, don't it?
And I want to say, like, you find yourself walking through the world with a lot more friends, and who doesn't in
Totally.
times like these, want a lot more friends. Suddenly, you got friends everywhere you go. Non-human friends, animal friends, plant friends. Everywhere you go, this new flower you're looking at, it's actually your friend.
Yeah,
That's
it's
what I was
popping
thinking.
up to
Like,
say hello.
yeah, it's giving the gift of its beauty to you.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. I'm more into that. I'm into that I'm into the paradigm of all my relations. All of creation is composed of my relations.
Yeah, I mean, one of the kind of like core wounds of white people is that they were taught that their relations are only those people who are their like blood related to, who they share a name with. right? And cut off from all this other whole network of relatedness.
Hmm. I think that is like it's like when I was in my early 20s, that's when I started actively getting involved in my people's culture. And you have all of these like they're on one hand they're beginner level teachings, and also on another hand they're beginner level teachings only because they're so commonly true that they're always cropping up in conversation.
Hmm.
And that beginner level commonly true cropping up all the time for a good reason. One of those teachings was, you know, exactly what you're talking about. You know, they'd say, you know, mitakyo asen or all my relations. And, you know, I can remember the first time that I heard it, you don't know what it means, you know, and so you start to make a space in your mind to understand what that means when people start talking about it. And you start to get a little sense, and it's kind of what we're talking about, that everything is sentient, everything is alive, everything has a spirit, and everything is to be respected as a relative, and that and everything means everything. You know, it's not just uh, the trash panda; it's also the river behind you. And when you start to see that you're actually uh, immersed in a universe of relationships, and that reality is this universe of relationships, uh, it becomes important for you to know how to have a good relationship with
Yeah.
life, you know? And what a skill set to have as just a regular person to know how to have a good relationship, because right away we start to home in on the building blocks of that's been have been present in a lot of the different parts of this conversation, you know, to respect, to have empathy, to use our imagination to imagine the other's life in a way that connects us to the intelligence of our compassion, so we can see how can we help, you know, how can we be of service, how can we give, how can we support, because we're aware that that help, that giving, that support, that service is coming to us all the time from all everything who
Hmm.
contributed to the water we drink and the food we eat all throughout our day, to the home we live in, to everything. You know, we're on the receiving end of so much that it's only right that we be on the giving end of so much. And if we're surrounded by relatives everywhere we go, you know, we kind of begin to know who we are and why we're here, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. And that receiving, it could start with the first conscious breath you take in the morning.
Mm,
Like the breath is so uh,
mm,
always there that
mm.
we never think about it. But
What,
without
what,
it, we'd be goners,
yeah,
just
I was
like
gonna
the
say,
sun.
as a, out of curiosity, yeah, so what do you think about when you think about the mystery of our life breath, you know?
Man, that's a deep mystery, and one I've been contemplating for a long time.
Mm,
One of the beautiful things about this Indian tradition of yoga
mm,
is it can connect you to that mystery of the breath.
mm,
The breath is the source of life. And so what's in the breath? You know,
mm,
life force is the best way I can put it, you know, like that which brings life.
mm.
And without it, no life. I mean, so pretty fundamental, right? So like my gratitude starts with that,
Wow.
and then I go outside for my morning run with my little dog, and there's the sun. I go, holy fuck, the sun showed up again today. So I got to sing a little song thanking for the sun for showing up today. Bringing warmth and light to everything that lives.
Mm,
Because man, if he didn't show up one day, again, we'd be
mm,
goners. So like for me, like religion is so freaking common sense if you're paying attention, like what to pray to, who to pray to. Like
mm,
you said, the water comes out of the tap from our well. That's milk from Mother Earth,
mm,
you know? God, why not start with that? You know, and then next thing you know, you'll be praying all day. And
Yeah.
people wonder why, like, traditional cultures, they spend so much time in prayer and ritual. Well, there's so
Hmm.
much to say thank you to. And we,
Yeah.
in this modern world, we got to be busy making money, feeding the machine.
Oof.
We don't make time for prayer, you know.
Hmm.
But like when you're talking about all my relations, this phrase popped in my head. It's like you said you started to use this phrase when you really didn't fully understand its implications, right?
Hmm.
And that network, how vast it is that it connects you to. But this phrase popped in my head, like the prayer, like if we're in this process of remembering, right? If we're at the beginner level, life,
Hmm.
humanness 101 level,
Hmm.
that so the prayer, even if you don't fully grasp it with your experience, but the prayer can be a placeholder for a new perspective.
Hmm. Hmm. Beautiful. Hmm. This is beautiful.
Because now when you say all my relations, I'm sure it's loaded with all kinds of meaning that you didn't quite have
Hmm.
before, right?
Oh yeah, and I think uh, it's cool how all these different things we're talking about, they just the platform they're sitting on inside of our heart minds just keeps enlarging and enlarging as time goes on, you
Mm.
know? So we're just more fully inhabited by their synergistic combined uh, goodness and mystery and healthfulness and joy. And I would say like these are the kind of undertakings that I think we're made for as people. Like you said, looking at to feed a machine or to give thanks to the earth and creation and life and spirit. These are the things we're made for. We're meant to be home for these ever enlarging understandings that just make us better at loving life and feeding life and caring for life. And again, I think so that we can be like Fool's Crow, this living example that transmits out to all the others who are involved in different stages of becoming living examples of the same. The
Mm.
earth made us so that we could become living examples of this stuff that we're talking about, that the best of our ancestors understood and still embody in real time with us today. You know, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I don't think we're ever gonna. I think it is like it returns us to humility to know that we're never gonna reach an end point when it comes to understanding these things. You know,
Yeah.
that's how it's supposed to be.
Yeah. I mean, that's interesting, right? Like that we're kind of like built to never quite put it all together.
I don't
Like
know.
other animals don't seem to be afflicted with this, you know? Like a squirrel doesn't have to go to therapy to figure out who he is and what he's here to do. He just wakes up and he does it, you know?
Uh-huh.
Watches his
Hmm.
parents do the thing and then next season he's doing the thing. No neuroses, no separation between ego and self or you know, just in playful, joyful participation.
Uh-huh. And I feel like you might know you might have an understanding, but yeah, it's the the cosmos understands what we're talking about, and we're just trying to get there. Yeah, there's still a lot of other players on the stage that who knows, maybe the next evolution of humanity will get better at talking about in a widespread way, and it's like even more of the picture will be seen and comprehended and understood. I actually I want to say like I had a Sundance. He was my adopted brother, and he was my Sundance chief. And oh, I loved learning from him and everything he had to say. He was so articulate and stuff like that. But he said this to me, and I've since heard other people say it. But of course, when he said it, and it was being the first time that I heard it, man, it really stuck with me. And I think you kind of said it earlier, actually. he said, we're all carrying a piece of the puzzle, and we're meant to combine our pieces together so that we can have the full understanding. So it's like we're do what you're supposed to do with the piece that you're carrying, but you just kind of got to accept that you're carrying a piece. You're not carrying all thousand pieces of the puzzle, but you're carrying a piece or some pieces.
Mm.
Yeah. And maybe as time goes on, more will arrive with other of the thousand pieces, and just more of the picture will flesh itself out.
Okay, let me take a little risk here, out on the edge of my thinking.
Let's get
Okay,
risky.
I think I think maybe even the idea that we're meant to understand everything, to know
Hmm.
everything, that might be one of those foreign implants
Hmm.
that keep us running around in circles rather than doing what we're here to do, which is much more kind of simple and humble.
Hmm.
I had this vision not too long ago. I sit with this question of like, I look out in the world
Hmm.
and see all of the crazy shit that humans are up to.
Hmm.
Not a lot of it good,
Hmm.
and seemingly counter to the life impulse. And so I sit with this question of like, what the hell are we here for? And how did like we humans end up kind of in this unique position, with these big brains and this ability to think and project our consciousness to the future and to the past and, all this stuff. And I had this vision of our earliest ancestors getting up on two legs for the first time.
Hmm.
And the story I always heard was that we got up on two legs, became bipedal, and then therefore, grew the bigger brains and all that. That we did that initially to become better hunters.
Hmm.
That somehow that allowed us to become better hunters. And in my vision, it was like, no, we stood up on two legs to free up our hands for making
Hmm.
things,
Wow.
for
Wow.
for creating art that somehow reflected the beauty of this creation. And
Wow.
that like that's our job actually is like Homo aestheticus, you know?
Oh,
Um,
wow.
because and then was like confirmation came in from somebody else said, yeah, because humans became like the worst hunters out of all the creatures. When they stood up on two legs, they became really kind of off balance and wobbly. They fall over easy, their backs hurt. And
Wow.
I was thinking, I got a vision of like indigenous people in the Amazon hunting, and they're all crawling around. They all become more like four-leggeds when they're
Hmm.
hunting because that's better for hunting. So this whole story that we stood up on
Oh,
two legs in the savannah to become better hunters, I'm like, no, that's bullshit. Because what did we initially start doing too? Carving flutes out of bones and taking skins and putting them over a frame to beat on, and you know, it's like we started making art from the get-go,
wow. Wow.
reaching
Wow.
up on the cave wall to put that handprint there. Like that to me is like, here's what we were here for. Remember this.
Hmm. Wow. That's a new one on me. I feel like I'm gonna remember that one from you, and I'm gonna utilize that one. It's because
Mm.
it's like as storytellers and stuff like that, and it makes me think too, it's like how much of storytelling is about understanding. So it's like you're telling a story, and I don't think that the people say, now in at the end of the day, the purpose of this story I'm about to tell you is for you to achieve this particular understanding. No, the purpose of telling the story is many things I don't even understand as a storyteller. But it makes me think of like maybe the purpose of telling a story is to do exactly what you're talking about, uh, spurred our our transition from four-leggedness to two-leggedness. The same thing. Maybe telling a story is working something into the world with our tongue in the same way our hands are working things into the world, like what you're talking about with the 10 digits or whatever. Yeah, and
Well,
like you said, it's not about understanding at the end of the day. It's about feeding, serving,
Yeah.
giving, beautifying, creating, carving, making. And I think even then, maybe we're on the it's on we're on the tip of it, but maybe we're not there yet on fully,
Mm.
I'm not sure. I love that, dude. I love that.
Well, look, even man, when you tell your story, you're talking a lot with your hands too. Imagine trying to tell a story.
Ah,
Imagine trying to tell a story with your hands bound behind your back. You
I
think
just
it'd
now
be
you
possible?
I don't just yeah, it's like yeah, yeah. What role are our hands playing when they're telling our story? Maybe
Man, they're doing a lot.
it's the others in the room who are getting to get in on it too,
Right, yeah, like we're
right?
just like a marionette, you know?
They're getting in on it.
Well, there's something about that, you know? You look at these Indian classical music singers,
Hmm.
you know, and they're like channeling from the source. That's like the
Hmm.
vehicle is the music for that. And why
Hmm.
there's so much improvisation allowed in that music for them to be that hollow bone that spirit's playing through, right? And I had an Indian music teacher once, she said, you know, you can't sing without your hands.
Wow.
It's like your hands have to get into it. So first you got to get like free in your body before you can actually sing. And so when she would sing, her hands were doing this whole dance, you know, like it was
Wow.
part of, it was like a visual aspect of the music. And it was maybe helping her to channel something, you know? But the spirit's like moving not just the lips and the tongue, but the spirit's moving the whole body, you know? So I think it's the same with a good storyteller, you know? Like they're animated, full of soul, like, right?
Yeah. And now you make me think too, it's like listening to that, I'm thinking, why does she say that you have to involve your hands? And the thing it makes me think of is like our so that what we're doing becomes a whole being endeavor. We're doing it
Yeah.
with our whole being. And that's how I was taught to pray. When you pray, you don't just pray with 20% of yourself and the other 80% of you is thinking about this or is tapping its foot.
Yeah.
This is important. This making this music is important. Telling this story is important. If it's really important to the point where it's starting to, touch on the sacred, it's starting to reach up and begin to like graze the sacred, do it with your whole being. And so maybe like the involvement of your hands is an essential part of that. Like the whole team is on the court. Nobody's sitting on the bench. The whole team is on the court. How do we know? Look at that sucker's hands. He's in
He
it,
keeps
man. He's
moving
in it.
around. We can't keep the
They're
spotlight
going
on
all
him,
over the
you know?
place.
Yeah, it reminds me of the great sage Bootsy Collins. Free your ass and your mind will follow.
Hell yeah. Yeah. At the end of
Yeah.
the day, what you're doing with your life energy should make you want to get up and dance.
Hmm.
The end. Get up and dance. Have a good time. Express your joy. Give thanks. Move your whole body. Dance.
Yeah, and I would say like even express your grief with your whole body, you know?
Mm. Mm.
My body was racked with sobs. Like, wow,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
But we got to end it for now. But
Okay.
man, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I feel like so much is going to continue to grow out of this for me. Lots of kernels kind of in my mud right now.
Thank you so much for inviting me on. I just feel a lot circulating between us and between all the future listeners. And it's kind of just like it's like a lot's being exchanged that's going to benefit us all so that when we leave what's happening in this present moment that's finding life on this recorded podcast, man, we get to go home with stuff that makes us feel good, inspires us, can fire up our investigations, whether they're in progress or have been in the closet for too long,
Yeah,
get out there and do the stuff we love. Be about
yeah.
it.
And I've had the feeling like maybe we're kind of mouthpieces for a lot of people in this
Mm.
conversation. So I'd love to pick it up with you down the road. This has been
Oh,
really
yeah.
good.
Let's do this again sometime.
All right, man. Take care.
Okay.
Have a beautiful day.
You too.